All right, so let's dive into Nehemiah 8:10.
Okay.
The joy of the Lord is your strength. I mean, you've heard this right. You've seen it on a coffee mug.
Oh, yeah, probably preached on it a few times too.
Exactly, and that's why we wanted to go deep on this one. We've got a whole stack of sermons from pastors all across the country who have taken some really interesting approaches to Nehemiah 8:10. Plus, we've got research, we've got historical context, and even some cross-references that you may not have considered before.
Yeah, we're talking like fresh insights, practical illustrations that you can actually use.
Right, because our listeners, they already know what the verse says.
Right.
They want to know how to make it come alive for their congregations.
Yeah, and that's exactly what we're here for. So to kick things off, why don't we jump into one of the most common challenges pastors face with this verse distinguishing between joy and happiness?
Yeah, because they get lumped together all the time,
Yeah,
but they're not the same thing, are they?
not at all. And one pastor tackled this head on using a brilliant illustration from the world of sports. He brought up LeBron James and his incredible consistency on the basketball court.
Okay, I'm intrigued. How does LeBron James connect to Nehemiah 8:10?
Well, this pastor argued that LeBron's sustained success isn't about feeling happy every time he steps onto the court. It's about a deeper, more enduring kind of strength that comes from disciplined focus and unwavering commitment.
So he's saying that's what true joy is like.
Exactly.
Not just a fleeting emotion,
Right, yeah.
but a source of consistent strength.
Exactly. It's not about ignoring the challenges or pretending that everything is perfect.
Right.
It's about finding that deep, abiding joy in the Lord that anchors us and empowers us even when things get tough.
Now, that's an illustration that would definitely resonate with a lot of people, especially in a sports-loving culture.
Absolutely. And it's a great example of how using these kind of unexpected connections can make a familiar verse feel fresh and relevant.
Speaking of unexpected connections, another pastor we looked at actually brought in some scientific research to support his message about joy.
Oh, that's interesting. Tell me more about that.
He referenced a study from the University of Kentucky about the 17-second rule. Apparently, if you intentionally focus on a positive thought for just 17 seconds, it can trigger a ripple effect of positivity in your brain.
That's fascinating. So he tied that into the idea of choosing joy being a spiritual discipline.
Exactly. It's not about waiting for good things to happen to feel joyful.
Right.
It's about actively cultivating that joy in our hearts and minds.
So it's more than just a feeling. It's an active choice that we make that really adds another layer to the idea of the joy of the Lord is your strength.
It does, doesn't it? It suggests that the more we practice choosing joy, the more we strengthen that muscle, the more resilient we become in the face of adversity.
Now, to really understand the weight of this verse, we need to kind of delve into the historical context. I mean, imagine the Israelites who just returned from exile. They're rebuilding their lives, their city, their entire community from scratch. It was a time of immense hardship and uncertainty.
And then they hear the law read aloud, and it's this flood of emotions.
All right.
They're weeping over their past mistakes,
Yeah.
but also celebrating their renewed covenant with God.
Right. They're physically and emotionally drained. So when Nehemiah tells them the joy of the Lord is your strength, it's not just a feel-good platitude.
It's a lifeline. It's a call to find strength in the midst of their struggles, to anchor themselves in something bigger than their circumstances.
Exactly. Knowing the historical context really adds a powerful layer to this verse. It's not just a nice sentiment, it's a declaration of resilience in the face of incredible adversity.
Which brings us to some of those creative sermon illustrations that you mentioned earlier. Pastors are using unexpected objects or stories to bring Nehemiah 8:10 to life.
I'm all ears. Give me an example.
Okay, one pastor actually used Laffy Taffy to illustrate a point about God's joy.
Laffy Taffy, I'm not sure I see the connection.
He was talking about Psalm 2.4, where it says, God laughs at the schemes of the wicked. He held up a piece of Laffy Taffy and said it represents God's joy.
Yeah.
You can pull the stretch and try to break it, but it just bounces back.
That's a great image. It really drives home the point that God's joy is unbreakable, unshakable.
And so memorable. You can bet everyone in that congregation went home thinking about Laffy Taffy and God's joy.
Now that's a sermon illustration done right.
Yeah.
Simple, relatable, and theologically sound.
And that's what we're all about here, giving pastors and Bible study leaders practical takeaways they can actually use.
Absolutely. Speaking of practical takeaways, another pastor used the image of a toy car rolling down a ramp to illustrate a point about the power of positive thinking.
Okay, I'm picturing it, but how does a toy car relate to Nehemiah 8:10?
He was talking about how one positive thought can gain momentum and lead to more positive thoughts, just like a toy car gaining speed as it rolls down a hill.
So he was connecting that to the idea of joy as a source of strength.
Exactly. He was saying that when we choose to focus on the good, when we cultivate a positive mindset, it creates a ripple effect that can actually empower us to overcome challenges.
I like that it's a great way to visualize the idea of joy as a force that propels us forward even when we're facing obstacles.
Now, one of the most striking interpretations we came across was this idea of joy as a weapon.
Oh yeah, that one really stood out to me too. It almost sounds counterintuitive, doesn't it? How can joy be a weapon?
Right. But this pastor argued that when we're filled with the joy of the Lord, it becomes a force that helps us overcome the giants in our lives. It's not about ignoring the hard stuff, but facing it head on with the confidence that comes from knowing God is with us.
It's like that old saying, laugh in the face of danger. It's not about being reckless, but about having an unshakable faith that gives us the strength to persevere.
And what's fascinating is how this idea of joy as a weapon actually ties back into the historical context of Nehemiah 8:10.
Okay, I'm seeing the connection the Israelites were facing. All sorts of giants rebuilding their city, reestablishing their community, facing opposition from their enemies.
Right, and Nehemiah was essentially saying, your weapon against these giants is the joy of the Lord. Don't let them steal your joy. Don't let them crush your spirit. Cling to that joy. Let it fuel you. Let it be your source of strength.
That puts a whole new spin on the verse, doesn't it? It's not just about feeling good. It's about tapping into a source of power that can help us overcome even the most daunting challenges.
Now, you mentioned cross-references earlier. I'm always curious to see how other passages in Scripture shed light on familiar verses. What did you discover about Nehemiah 8:10?
Well, one that really jumped out at me was John 15:11, where Jesus says to his disciples, "These things I have spoken to you, that my joy may be in you and that your joy may be full."
Ah, yes. It's a beautiful reminder that Jesus himself desires for his followers to experience complete joy.
And it's not just about feeling happy or content.
Right.
It's about sharing in the very joy of Christ, which is a joy that transcends circumstances and remains constant even in the face of suffering.
What's fascinating is how this connects to the idea of joy as a source of strength. If we're rooted in the joy of Christ, we can tap into a wellspring of power that enables us to face any challenge with confidence and hope. It's amazing how that one verse, John 15:11, adds so much depth to our understanding of Nehemiah 8:10.
Right. It's like a whole other dimension opens up when we connect those two passages.
And there are even more cross-references that shed light on this idea of joy as strength. For instance, Romans 15:13 talks about the God of hope filling us with all joy and peace.
So it's not just about having a positive outlook. It's about being filled with the very essence of hope and peace,
Yeah.
which then overflows as joy.
Exactly. And that joy fueled by hope and peace becomes a source of incredible strength. It's what enables us to keep going even when we feel like giving up.
It's like having a secret weapon against discouragement and despair.
And speaking of weapons, I'm curious to go back to that pastor who used the image of joy as a weapon. I feel like there's a lot to unpack there.
Oh, absolutely. It's a powerful metaphor and one that can really challenge the way we think about joy.
Because when we typically think of a weapon, we think of something aggressive, something used to attack. But this pastor was talking about joy as a weapon in a different sense.
Right. It's not about using joy to hurt others or force our beliefs on them. It's about the transformative power of joy within ourselves.
It's about the way joy can disarm the enemy, break down strongholds, and set us free from the things that hold us captive.
And I think that ties back to the idea of joy being a spiritual discipline. It's something we have to actively cultivate, especially when we're facing challenges.
It's like putting on armor. We have to intentionally choose joy, clothe ourselves in it, and let it be our shield against the attacks of the enemy.
Now, you mentioned earlier that sometimes church can feel a bit heavy, and I wonder if part of that is because we've lost sight of the power of joy.
I think you're onto something there. We can get so focused on the seriousness of our faith, the weight of our responsibilities, that we forget to embrace the joy that's at the heart of it all.
But if Nehemiah 8:10 teaches us anything, it's that joy isn't just a nice feeling. It's essential for our spiritual well-being. It's our strength.
And when we allow ourselves to experience that joy, it spills over into every aspect of our lives, including our ministries.
It changes the way we preach, the way we teach, the way we interact with our congregations.
It's like a light that shines out from within us, drawing others to the source of that joy.
Which brings us back to one of the key goals of this deep dive, giving pastors and Bible study leaders practical tools they can use to bring Nehemiah 8:10 to life for their congregations.
Because it's one thing to understand the concept of joy as strength, but it's another thing to actually embody it and communicate it in a way that resonates with others.
Exactly. So let's talk practical application. What are some specific things pastors can do to help their congregations experience the joy of the Lord as a real, tangible force in their lives?
Well, I think it starts with modeling that joy ourselves. People can spot a fake smile a mile away, but when they see genuine joy radiating from their pastor, it's contagious.
It's like that saying, preach the gospel at all times. Use words if necessary. Our actions often speak louder than our words.
And if we're not experiencing the joy of the Lord ourselves, how can we expect to authentically share it with others?
So step one for pastors, cultivate joy in your own heart. Make it a priority. Spend time with God. Practice gratitude. Find reasons to laugh and let that joy overflow into your ministry.
Beautifully said. And once we've established that foundation of personal joy, then we can start to think about how to cultivate it in our congregations.
And that's where those sermon illustrations become so valuable. They provide a tangible way to connect a sometimes abstract concept like joy to real-life experiences.
Absolutely, like that Laffy Taffy illustration. It's not just a gimmick, it's a powerful way to help people visualize and remember the unbreakable nature of God's joy.
And it's something pastors can easily adapt to their own style and context. They could even bring in actual Laffy Taffy and hand it out to the congregation.
Now that would be a memorable sermon.
Exactly. And it's not just about finding creative illustrations. It's about infusing our sermons and lessons with a sense of joy, even when we're dealing with difficult topics.
Because the message of Nehemiah 8:10 is ultimately a message of hope. It's a reminder that even in the midst of hardship, even when we feel surrounded by giants, the joy of the Lord is our strength.
And that's a message people need to hear now more than ever.
Absolutely. So as pastors and Bible study leaders, let's be intentional about cultivating joy in ourselves and in our congregations. Let's use our creativity, our humor, and our passion to make the message of Nehemiah 8:10 come alive in fresh and unexpected ways.
And let's remember that sometimes the best way to preach about joy is to simply live it out. Let our lives be a testament to the transformative power of the joy of the Lord.
Beautifully said. I think that's a perfect segue into our final part, where we'll explore some practical ways to apply these insights and make joy a central theme in our ministries.
Welcome back to our deep dive into Nehemiah 8:10.
Yeah, we're exploring how the joy of the Lord can be a source of strength, especially for pastors and Bible study leaders.
We've talked about the difference between joy and happiness,
Hmm.
the historical context of the verse, and some really creative sermon illustrations.
Right.
And now it's time to get even more practical,
Mm.
because we know our listeners are busy. They're dealing with all sorts of demands,
Right.
and they need actionable takeaways that they can actually use.
Absolutely. So let's cut to the chase. What are some concrete things that pastors and Bible study leaders can do to cultivate joy, both in their own lives and in the lives of their congregations?
One thing that really struck me from the sermons we analyzed was the emphasis on gratitude.
Oh, absolutely. So many pastors talked about how a grateful heart is essential for experiencing joy.
It makes sense, doesn't it? When we focus on what we lack, we become discontent, envious, even bitter. But when we choose to focus on what we have, even the small things, it opens our hearts to joy.
It's like that old saying, count your blessings. It sounds cliche, but it's incredibly powerful.
So practical tip number one for our listeners, encourage your congregation to practice gratitude.
And don't just preach it, model it. Share your own experiences of gratitude, both big and small. Make it a regular part of your sermons, your prayers, your interactions with people.
I love that because it's one thing to tell people to be grateful, but it's another thing to show them what it looks like in your own life.
Right, and sometimes the simplest things are the most powerful. Encourage people to start a gratitude journal. Write down 3 things they're thankful for each day.
Or even just take a few moments each morning to reflect on the blessings in their lives.
Those small acts of gratitude can make a big difference in shifting our perspective and opening our hearts to joy.
Now, another practical tip that came up repeatedly was the importance of being mindful of our thoughts.
Oh, that's so crucial because our thoughts have a direct impact on our emotions and our actions.
And remember that 17-second rule we talked about, intentionally focusing on a positive thought for just 17 seconds can create a ripple effect of positivity in our brains.
So practical tip number 2, teach your congregation to be intentional about their thoughts.
Encourage them to challenge negative thoughts.
Yeah.
Replace them with positive affirmations and focus on things that bring them joy.
And this isn't about pretending everything is perfect or ignoring real problems.
Right.
It's about choosing to focus on the good even in the midst of difficult circumstances.
It's about training our minds to see the possibilities instead of dwelling on the limitations.
Right.
Okay, so we've got gratitude and positive thinking. What else can we add to our toolbox of joy-boosting practices?
Well, we can't forget about the power of laughter. Remember that pastor who talked about laughter being a weapon against the giants in our lives?
That was such a brilliant illustration. It really challenged the way I think about joy.
Because laughter has this incredible ability to disarm the enemy, to break down walls, to lift our spirits even when we're feeling down.
So practical tip number 3, encourage your congregation to find reasons to laugh every day.
Tell them to watch a funny movie, share a joke with a friend, or simply allow themselves to be silly and playful.
And as pastors and Bible study leaders, let's not be afraid to inject a little humor into our sermons and lessons.
Because laughter is contagious and it can create a sense of connection and joy that transcends the words we're speaking.
All right, we've got gratitude, positive thinking, and laughter. Any other practical tips we should add to the list?
Well, I think it's important to remember that joy isn't just about feeling good, it's also about doing good.
What do you mean by that?
Sometimes the greatest joy comes from serving others.
I see what you're saying. When we shift our focus outward, when we give of ourselves to others, it can bring a deep sense of purpose and fulfillment.
Exactly. So practical tip number 4, encourage your congregation to find ways to serve others.
Challenge them to volunteer at a local charity, help a neighbor in need, or simply offer a listening ear to someone who's struggling.
Because when we give of ourselves, we receive so much more in return.
And that includes a deep sense of joy and connection.
And finally, let's not forget the most important source of joy, our relationship with God.
That's the foundation of it all, isn't it?
Well, absolutely. When we spend time in prayer, when we read His Word, when we connect with Him on a deeper level, it fills us with a joy that transcends circumstances.
So practical tip number 5, make time for God every day.
Encourage your congregation to prioritize their relationship with God, to seek Him first, and to let His joy be their strength.
It doesn't have to be a huge time commitment. Even a few minutes of prayer meditation or reading scripture can make a world of difference.
The key is to cultivate a consistent habit of connecting with God.
Because it's in those moments of intimacy, those moments of surrender, that we truly tap into the joy of the Lord, which is our strength.
So there you have it, 5 practical tips for cultivating joy. Practice gratitude, focus on positive thoughts, find reasons to laugh, serve others, and connect with God.
And remember, these are just a starting point. There are countless other ways to experience and express joy.
The important thing is to be intentional about it. Don't wait for joy to magically appear. Choose it, cultivate it, and watch as it transforms your life and the lives of those around you.
And as we wrap up this deep dive into Nehemiah 8:10, we want to leave you with this final thought.
Okay.
What if the joy of your congregation was the very thing that drew others to faith? What if your radiating joy, your infectious laughter, your unwavering hope became a magnet, attracting others to the love and grace found in Christ?
It's a powerful thought, isn't it? And it all starts with a choice to embrace the joy of the Lord as our strength.
Thank you for joining us on this deep dive into Nehemiah 8:10. We hope it's inspired you to see this familiar verse in a new light and to embrace the joy of the Lord as a transformative force in your life and ministry.
And remember, the journey doesn't end here. Keep exploring, keep digging deeper, and keep allowing the joy of the Lord to be your strength.